Hi everybody, it's Mr. Seymour. This week's topic is political parties. This is chapter 6 in your textbook. What we're going to do is look at several aspects of political parties. A lot of us see on the news so many disagreements between members of Congress, the whole idea that the president and Congress don't get along. We see a lot of partisan politics going on. We go to the polls and we're asked to vote for people who claim to be Republicans or Democrats. But a lot of us don't really understand exactly what political parties are, or the fact that their entire purpose was not even planned within the Constitution. The Founding Fathers were afraid of the idea of political parties, but James Madison was smart enough to know that you weren't going to get rid of political factions, and that's what political parties were called, factions. So let's take a look at the purpose, role, history, and future of political parties in this lesson. Now, the question is, when you have political parties, whose allegiance do they have? Does the political party have the allegiance to the candidate, the allegiance to the party itself, or the allegiance to the people? And we depend an awful lot on political parties in a two-party system in our country, yet we don't realize that the allegiance of a political party is to get the candidate elected. They will do and say anything to get a candidate elected because that's the purpose of a political party. So what are political parties? A political party is an organization that runs a candidate for political office and coordinates the actions of its officials that are elected under its banner. There are three parts to political parties. There's the party in government. This is the group of office holders who belong to a specific political party and were elected as candidates of that party. Then there's the party organization. This is the leadership. A specific political party's leaders and workers at the national, state, and local level. And then there's the party in the electorate. This is the branding role. This is the group of citizens who identify with political parties. And here's the thing. One of the major roles of a political party is branding. If you go to the grocery store and you want cookies, and you see Chips Ahoy and you see Oreos, if you open up, you buy a bag of Oreos, you know what the Oreos are going to taste like, look like, feel like. You know. And if you open up that bag and it said Oreos on the outside and you had Chips Ahoy on the inside, you'd be very disappointed. If you look at a bag of Chips Ahoys and you love Chips Ahoys and you open them up and you get a bag of Oreos, you'd be very disappointed. So the branding function is very important to people as they select their candidates, because oftentimes they look more at the political party than they do at the candidate. And it helps us identify our choices, make clear choices based on our ideologies or our political belief systems. And if the political parties don't do that job, then the problem is that there is no role for a political party, because that's the main purpose. Now, the next thing I want to do is take a look at a video from The Daily Show that's going to talk about political parties. And then after that, we're going to look at the role of the Tea Party today, which tends to be the most controversial. And we're going to talk about the history of political parties. All right, so let's go on ahead and watch this video and get started with our notes.
The two-party system.
The two-party system is the form of government that we have here in the United States.
It's also what they have in Great Britain. Over there they have the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Here we have Democrats and Republicans.
Now, is that a healthy situation? There's a short answer to that, and there's a slightly longer one. The short answer is no. And the slightly longer answer is no, it isn't. It isn't healthy at all.
Really, when you have two main parties to choose from, it's not really so much about the candidate that you're in love with. It's more about the candidate that you're less in hate with.
I don't know why you're so surprised that there's only two political parties. There's only two of everything. Black people, white people. Okay?
It's easy. It's the right choice or the other right choice.
It basically means that you're putting all your eggs as a nation into two old, very untrustworthy baskets.
Inevitably, in the race, someone's wealthy grandpa wants to get into the mix, and he's like, I think we should live in a three-party system. I think America should be a multi-party system. And then he comes and steals some very critical votes away from the person that you hate the least. And then everyone's like, I hate your grandpa. He ruined it for everyone. And you're like, I know, my grandpa is so annoying, but he's really wealthy, and so I can't say anything.
iPhone, BlackBerry, Elvis, Beatles. Only two choices. Except for ice cream. There's three. And that is why we invented Neapolitan. 3 in 1.
Other countries don't have the two-party system. Not all countries do. Countries like Italy and India, Sweden, Finland, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, Israel, Ireland.
The American political system has become like a supermarket in communist East Germany, where you have so little choice, you're basically given the option of, well, do you want to eat these States brand baked beans, or do you want to starve to death?
It is a terrific system. Unless you're a third party. And then it sucks.
And recently, a lot of people have been asking, so what's this whole Tea Party thing? What about the Tea Party? We're going to look at a little video. This is from Colbert. So again, it takes a slanted look, and it's kind of making fun of the whole idea of the Tea Party. What is the Tea Party? But I just kind of want you to look at this, maybe get a little laugh or two, but at the same time, think about, is there room for something like a Tea Party? What's going on with the Tea Party? How do they fit in? Now, if you or your family members are a member of the Tea Party, please do not take offense to this video. It's not meant to be in any way offensive, and I don't take responsibility for the content. But I do want to kind of use it as a starting board, a way of starting a conversation about, where is the role of the Tea Party? So let's look at this video.
If you were going to advise me which Tea Party to join, would I join the Tea Party Patriots, the Tea Party Express, the Tea Party Nation, or the Red Zingers?
The Tea Party coloring book for kids. Kids will be able to color in pictures of the American flag with kid-friendly messages like, the Tea Party calls upon our representatives to limit the government's role in everyday life and to support people and businesses, but not demand from, control, or overtax the people or businesses. Fun!
Kentucky Senator-elect Rand Paul was unabashed about the Tea Party's power coming into Washington. Let's listen to Rand Paul.
A lot of us are having trouble keeping our excitement down about Rand Paul.
I don't know. I guess anyone can be a Tea Party person.
Okay, Christine O'Donnell.
You're probably a Tea Party person.
I wish I was running for public office, but I got this stupid show to do.
O'Donnell's a Tea Party darling, or Darjeeling. I'd love to see more Tea Party kids' books, like Christine O'Donnell's Rainy Day Book of Masturbation Alternatives. Or this one for New York's gubernatorial Tea Party candidate, Down on the Farm with Carl Palladino. Featuring this fun drawing of a woman and a horse, where the woman, and that, kids, is how centaurs are made.
The Tea Party wants a spending cuts. Where do we cut first? Do we kill Social Security or Medicaid, or do we just kill old people?
I think you just kill...
They said that at Boston Harbor. They said, if I can't have tea, nobody can have tea.
The Tea Party people don't sound like they're ready to compromise. They're saying...
Why should they? Why should they compromise? They are angry, and anger is always the best way to solve things. Yeah, but things changed after George Bush left office.
They certainly did. We had a black president. That made all the difference.
Well, that's saying that is saying the Tea Party is essentially a racist endeavor.
Of course.
Not of course. I mean, there are several people who are black who have been to tea parties.
This movement is a direct result of people being fed up and angry with both political parties. And
yeah, but there weren't a lot of signs showing, you know, John Boehner with a bone through his nose. What about a balanced budget amendment? What about a tax cut? What about making Obama eat a bug? I believe that's in the Tea Party platform. Did the Tea Partiers really win this one?
Yes.
They did.
Yes.
Did they reach their goal of throwing the United States government into Boston Harbor?
The idea seems to be that if the House GOP refuses to raise the debt ceiling, a default crisis or gradual government shutdown will ensue, and the public will turn en masse against Barack Obama, and the Tea Party hobbits could return to Middle Earth, having defeated Mordor.
Then Mark Meckler of the Tea Party Patriots said of McCain, clearly McCain's been corrupted by the Ring of Power. McCain is clearly Sauron. Okay? He's in league with Sauron, who is actually Obama. Okay? And the hobbits aren't the Tea Party. The hobbits are Cantor and Boehner, okay? And Gandalf is the Tea Party right here, okay? You shall not pass legislation raising the debt ceiling. And then the cave troll, the cave troll is, I don't know, but it's awesome. Let's say Nancy Pelosi, I don't know.
So is the Tea Party, at this point, a separate party? Is it part of one of the two major parties? Is it a threat to our two-party system? At this point, most political scientists do not consider the Tea Party movement to be a separate political party. Instead, they believe that it will be assimilated into, or some believe will take over, the more conservative Republican Party because that's where it fits. Tea Party groups have forced the Republican Party to confront a number of conflicting views within the party and to forge compromises and to cause the party to shift to a more moralistic view and to a more to a view that's more fiscally oriented. It is at this point not really its own political party. The next thing we want to do is take a look at a video of the two-party system. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that video, and then from here we will talk about the history of two-party system in the United States and the role of the two major parties.
The history of the Democratic and Republican parties is a complex one. In fact, the two parties were once one party. In 1792, the Democratic-Republican Party formed up under the leadership of Thomas Jefferson, who would eventually become the third U.S. president. It opposed the Federalist Party, led by John Adams, who became the second U.S. president. The Democratic Republicans believed in strong states' rights and wanted the central government to have as little power as possible, while the Federalists believed in having a much stronger central government. The Federalists obtained most of their support from New England, but their biggest support from businesses, urbanites, and the rich, while the Democratic Republicans had their strongest support in the South and West, with their biggest support from farmers and the lower classes. The Federalist Party fizzled out early in the nation's history because it did not support the United States' combat with the British in the War of 1812. The Democratic Republicans, under President James Madison's leadership, supported the war, and public perceptions of the war were very high by its end. The election of 1824 was big because it included 4 main presidential candidates, all of whom claimed to be Democratic Republicans. The 2 frontrunners, however, were very different men. Andrew Jackson, like his forebears, favored a small central government approach, while John Quincy Adams favored the strong central government approach, carrying over the Federalist beliefs of his father, John Adams. Right after Adams' victory in the 1824 election, the Democratic Republicans split up. Jackson went on to form the Democratic Party, which favored small government. Jackson had a rematch with Adams in 1828 and became America's 7th president after that election. And Adams' supporters coalesced around a few different groups, the most prominent of which was the National Republican Party, which favored a strong central government. The National Republican Party quickly met its end after its poor showing in Jackson's landslide in the presidential election of 1832. The Whig Party then formed out of a coalition of former National Republicans and Southern Democrats who set aside their different ideas on the sides of government to oppose President Jackson's policies, especially Jackson's use of presidential vetoes to gain what they viewed as increasingly excessive power over Congress. The Whigs, who had support from nearly all the wealthy men in the United States, supported tariffs or taxes on imported goods, while the Democrats viewed tariffs as taxes on the poor to help the rich. The country's growing polarization over the moral, legal, and economic implications of allowing slavery in new American territories led to the formation of the Republican Party in 1854, which took a strong anti-slavery stance. The Whig Party became divided over the issue of slavery and split apart around 1856, with anti-slavery Whigs, mostly from the North, joining the newly formed Republican Party, and pro-slavery Whigs, mostly from the South, joining the Democrats. The northern states voted almost unilaterally for the Republican Party's presidential candidate, Abraham Lincoln, in the election of 1860, while the southern states voted overwhelmingly Democratic. Immediately after the Civil War, with African-American men now able to vote due to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the U.S. Constitution's 15th Amendment, Republican presidential candidates received electoral votes from the majority of the southern states holding elections in 1868 and 1872. With what became known as the Jim Crow laws, major voting restrictions were then placed on African Americans in the southern states. In each presidential election from 1880 to 1924, the states that were east of the Rio Grande and completely south of the latitude of 3630 North voted Democratic in almost every presidential election. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Democratic Party increased its local strength in urban areas of the North by attracting members of the large influx of new immigrants to the United States, the majority of which emigrated from Europe and entered through northern coastal cities, especially New York City. Political machines, such as the Tammany Hall machine in New York, sought to gain voting power by helping immigrants obtain jobs and services. During the turn of the century, the Democrats continued to desire low tariffs, and the Republicans advocated for higher tariffs, winning the majority of the support of business owners. It was also during the late 1800s and early 1900s that a rift developed within the Republican Party, with one side favoring pro-business owner policies and the other favoring increased protections for working-class Americans. The latter group became associated with the progressive movement, advocating social and economic reform to help combat hardships such as poverty. Some progressive Republicans joined the Democratic Party, influencing the party's views on social and economic issues. While the majority of the country, including most northern states from the Civil War, voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat, in the presidential elections from 1932 to 1944, this should not be considered a regional realignment of party strength, because national unity was heightened due to the nation's efforts in World War II and in recovering the economy from the Great Depression. Some historians believe the Democratic Party's growing support of civil rights in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, culminating in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, with strong bipartisan support in Congress, encouraged some Democrats to switch to the Republican Party. The big shift in party identification that occurred in the latter half of the 20th century largely came about because of the party's changing stances on the role of government in American society. The Republican Party, under presidents such as Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, and especially Ronald Reagan, came to view the central government as something that should be limited as much as possible, with an emphasis on tax reductions. This push for a limited role of the central government echoed the Democratic Party's belief on the size of government from the 1800s. Ironically, the Democratic Party, as an extension of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, which increased the central government's role in American life, chose to continue basing many of its policies around this perspective. President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs and President Barack Obama's push for universal health care are examples of this. Perhaps one of the most interesting perspectives on how the parties have realigned geographically can be seen in the comparison of the presidential election maps of 1896 and 2008.
So when you go back to the history of the party system, you have to understand that you have to go back as far as the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. You have to go back to the first two parties. The Federalists on one side wanted a strong central government. They wanted a national banking system. They wanted to assume the war debts of the states, and they wanted to take federal control over the military. They wanted high tariff barriers to protect infant industries. They were very pro-business. Whereas the Jeffersonian Democrats, these are the Democratic Republicans that would eventually become what we know as the Democratic Party. They wanted free trade because they were agrarian. These are the southern states mostly. These are states that wanted states' rights. They feared the concentration of power in the hands of the national government. And so this would become the roots of the Democratic Party. The Federalists were the party of Hamilton, Adams, and Washington. The Jeffersonian, even though Washington didn't believe in parties and wouldn't align himself, the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans were the party of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Our fifth president, James Monroe, would bring us to the era of good feelings. And this era of good feelings had to do with stepping away from partisan impulses. And partisan, the term partisan is talking about party and taking party on more than responsibility for government. So these parties are very different from what we think of as parties today. They had no real organization. They were mostly competing teams of elites, and they were mostly ideological. Then we go on from 1829 to 1856 with the Democrats and the Whigs. The second party system would see the demise of Federalists, a decade-long era of good feelings where there's only one party, the Democratic Republicans, and then the rise and ultimate demise of another party called the Whigs, which has nothing to do with wearing wigs. This is the era that sees the emergence and disappearance of political parties that are now forgotten to everybody but students of history who have to pass an AP World History exam or U.S. History exam. There are three major issues, though, in American history that will continue to dominate this era. One, and a very important one, is the spoils system. This is a practice of rewarding party supporters with benefits like jobs, government positions, making promises in exchange for votes. This is reformed during the progressive era of the 20th century. Then we have the party principle, which is the idea that a political party exists as an organization which is distinct from its elected officials as party leaders. And then you have slavery comes into play during this era. Slavery and the issue of slavery couldn't be resolved during this period, which leads to tension between the individual states, especially southern states and northern states, and also the federal government. The northern states tended to be more in line with believing that the federal government should have more of the responsibility and power. And of course, the southern states and the slave states wanted more of an agrarian and state-centered power. Following the election of 1828, Andrew Jackson will strengthen the Democratic Party, and he encourages party organizations at the state and the local level, and he creates this spoils system. The spoils system was there to reward local party members who were loyal to the political party. So this is a picture of Andrew Jackson at what would become basically an early version of a whistle stop. Whistle stops, of course, are happening with politicians going onto the back of trains as they would go from one place to another. This is Jackson on a stagecoach. Then we get to the third party system from 1857 to 1892, Republicans versus Democrats. Now, this is the one we would have known or seen more of a transition to where we are today. But in this system, it's a little different. The conflict over slavery would split the Whigs and ultimately destroy them, replacing them with an anti-slavery party known as the Republicans. Only the Civil War, though, would allow us to end slavery. Official racism, though, would continue in the South through the era of Reconstruction and into a transformation period into the mid-20th century. Overall, though, the Republicans would dominate this third iteration of political parties. This is not an era of third parties. This is the third party system in the United States. So the rise of William Jennings Bryan in the Democratic Party would mark the reshaping of that party, even though he would lose in 1896, 1900, and 1908. Bryan would capture the spirit of progressivism. And prior to Bryan, the Democrats had been classically a liberal party in favor of low tariff barriers, states' rights, gold standard, and non-imperialist foreign policies. The word classic liberal means something like Thomas Jefferson, not Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy is more of a progressive liberal. Classic liberal is somebody like Jefferson who wanted states' rights. William Jennings Bryan was in favor of the free coinage of silver. He said mankind should not be crucified on a cross of gold, meaning he wanted to get rid of the gold standard. He was also opposed to banks, railroads, and most trusts, and generally he favored a large and active federal government. The key issues of the fourth era of political parties were the nature of industrialization, the assimilation of the swelling immigrant population of America, and Republicans who continued to dominate during this era. Then we get to the New Deal. And the debate over Roosevelt and his New Deal program that he decided and proposed would be the best way of handling the Great Depression would establish the basic divide between Democrats and Republicans that we still see today. Democrats would favor strong federal government that would take an active role in the economy. Republicans preferred smaller federal government, fewer programs and regulations, and were more pro-business. So this fifth party system from 1933 to 1968 would see the increasing progressivism of the Democratic Party and the increasing conservatism of the Republican Party. And it would lead to, in 1968, what we know as a political realignment, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The New Deal was Franklin Roosevelt's plan to rescue the United States from the Great Depression, which was a worldwide economic collapse. And the coalition that it gave birth to would survive World War II and lead to our recovery through the Second World War and into the 1950s. But it also leads to social differences and upheavals in the 1960s. The New Deal coalition was a series of groups or assembly of groups who would align with and support the Democratic Party in the New Deal during the New Deal policies, and the reason was this was a group that was there to try to increase the security of the poor, the farmers, and those who had taken the hit the most during the Great Depression. So you saw an alignment of African Americans, Catholic, Jews, Union members, and white Southerners. The white Southerner part, what we call Blue Dog Democrats, that's the part that's going to change. The key issue of the New Deal was the government's role in the economy. The Democrats believed that large-scale federal intervention was the way to help the economy grow. This is Keynesian economics. They believed that it would help the economy grow faster, more smoothly, and that it would protect the smaller guy, the little guy. Republicans thought that the federal government was taking the role away from laissez-faire economics. It was taking the role that had been traditionally held by the state and local governments with no proof that the federal government could do much better. Republicans also favored a larger role in business and industry, and they dominated. The Democrats dominated this political party system, this fifth generation of political parties. This is the era of FDR. Now, the key issues between Republicans and Democrats after the 1968 primaries was civil rights, affirmative action, abortion, and war. And this is really leading to what we know as the Republicans and Democrats today. The move to this new generation of party system was driven by issue expansion, the introduction of new issues that would divide the parties into old coalitions. Neither of the parties would be dominant during the period of 1969 to the 1990s, and even now. The New Deal coalition is no more, but it has not been fully replaced, because what we see is on one side the Democrats favoring progressive liberalism, and on the other side the Republicans favoring more states' rights conservatism. So this is what we call a realignment. A realignment is a change in the size or composition of the parties' coalitions or the nature of the issues that divide the parties. This typically occurs within an election cycle or two, but it can occur gradually. The new issues that cause realignments are only important if they cause cross-cutting. Now, the issues in 1968 were the issues of civil rights, reactions to the new civil rights laws that had been going on since the 50s and 60s, reaction to the more liberal Supreme Court, Warren Burger Court. Cross-cutting means that the issues that raise disagreements within a party coalition or between political parties causes separation within that party. And so, remember, we saw that the Democratic Party had a tremendous number of Southern Democrats, Blue Dog Democrats, who are more conservative. Well, guess what? Those Blue Dog Democrats will realign with the Republican Party. So then also you get the moral majority in the 90s and the 80s. You get a new Republican Party going up in the 1980s after President Nixon. The whole idea here is that you see a realignment that's closer to what we've seen traditionally over history in terms of the two types of parties. One more southern and smaller state, one more northern and larger state. So the examples of cross-cutting issues during the 1850s and 60s, it was slavery. During the progressive era, the 1880s and 90s, it was gold standard. In 1968, it was the civil rights and Vietnam War. All of these caused tremendous changes within the behavior of the political parties, and they cause what are called realignments. So let's look back over our American party systems. The first party system from 1789 to 1828 dealt with Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Its fight was over where are we going to put the capital of the United States? Are we going to have national banking systems? How are we going to handle financial issues? Who's going to have more authority, the agrarian states or the northern states? The second generation of political parties was the Democrats and the Whigs from 1829 to 1856. It had to do with tariffs, which put farmers against mercantilists or merchants, and it had to do with slavery. The third generation was 1857 to 1896, which saw the creation of the Republican Party. And this is slavery, pre-Civil War, of course, then Reconstruction, post-Civil War, and industrialization. And this will be an era of the Republicans. Then our fourth generation, 1897 to 1932, again was an era more of the Republicans. Industrialization and immigration would become the era. And then in 1933 to 1968, it's controlled by the Democrats. And this is about size and scope of federal government and the role of the federal government in helping out the little guy. From 1969 to now, neither party has been dominant. The size and the scope of the federal government has been the big issue. Civil rights was our cross-cutting issue. Social issues have caused differences within the two parties, and foreign policy. So, let's talk about political machines. Tammany Hall was the political machine of New York, run by a guy named Boss Tweed. They controlled New York City politics, but Chicago had it, Philadelphia had them, all the major cities had these political machines. And it had to do with the party, and especially at the local level, would step up and help the little guy, or they would stand up for certain people. The strategy was called honest graft, rewarding party members and party workers and contributors and voters for their efforts to keep a machine's candidates in office. So basically it was legally buying votes. Then we saw limits on party organization. Party committees are non-hierarchical. That means that there is no true top-down structure. The Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee are ultimately controlled by the members themselves, not by the chairman. They're unable to compel the local and state level parties to do anything. For instance, state and local parties often adopt platforms that take positions that are relatively extreme or out of line with those of the national party. Or perhaps they think the national party has taken an extreme and they don't want to do that at the local level because it won't play well with their constituents. And remember, the idea is to get your candidates elected. So if a part of the party platform does not conform with local standards or local ideology, they will disassociate at the local level. So political machines, unofficial patronage systems that tried to acquire political power, governmental jobs, contracts, and so forth for party leaders and supporters, they are a little overstated in history because they never existed at the national level. This was always at the state and local level. But every large city had them. Getting rid of machine politics was a major cause for the progressive era under Teddy Roosevelt. This was the early 20th century. And this is where we see major victories for progressives and for the nation. This is where we have standards in wage and living, standards in pay, standards in work hours and quality of life. This is where we see the rise of labor unions. Some political scientists would argue that machine politics was able to deliver governmental services in a way that almost was more efficient. That it's expensive now to do everything at the national level. It's when we do things through our parties, it's often sprawling, often redundant. Bureaucratic processes have replaced the more localized processes. If you woke up and you saw a pothole in front of your house, you basically got a hold of your precinct chairman, and that precinct chairman got a hold of the boss in your city, and it got fixed. Things don't work that way anymore. The National Committee level is the party's principal organization, which is comprised of party representatives from each of the states. And it seeks to reflect the party because the party's membership or base is the source of its power. The constituency groups, like African Americans, Hispanic senior citizens, people with strong religious beliefs, women, and many others, will make up the party. So your parties tend to be coalitional rather than ideological. They tend to gravitate several different kinds of constituency groups together into two different groupings. Political action committees and super PACs are how political parties separate themselves from the ability to raise funds for ideological purposes. A PAC is an interest group or a division of interest groups that can raise money to contribute to campaigns or to spend on ads in support of a candidate. A 527 organization is called a super PAC. This is named after the section of the tax code that governs them. 527 groups are groups that are tax exempt, that are formed primarily to influence an election through mobilizing voters and by making ads. They don't directly endorse or oppose the candidate. They're more ideological in nature. But believe me, candidates depend on this because there's no limit on what a candidate can do as far as raising money. Now, the idea of branding, Republican and Democratic brand names. Remember I talked about the Oreos and the Chips Ahoys? Brand names are the use of party names to evoke certain positions on issues. This is where the platforms come in. So let's look at the Republican versus the Democratic platforms. Republicans are generally seen as more conservative. They favor limited government, Christian and religious values, support for prayer in school, opposition of abortion, opposing same-sex marriage. They're more hawkish on national defense. They support the idea that social welfare should be limited and domestic spending should be limited. They also support the Second Amendment or rights for guns. Democrats tend to be seen as more progressively liberal, not classically liberal. There's a stronger role for national government. They oppose entanglement of church and state. They oppose prayer in school. They support a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. They support the recognition of same-sex marriages. They support greater domestic spending and limited defense spending. And they support limitations on gun ownership. The ideology of the parties in government from 1952 to 2006. If you look here, in 1952, most everybody was, let's see if I can show you here, most everybody was basically towards the moderate, towards the middle. But if you look in 2010, you have divisions on the left and on the right. And it's this chasm in the middle that really worries everybody because it seems as though the moderate is a dying breed. Now, this is representation, but most of us see ourselves as moderate. We'll still see ourselves in here. So the question is, what's going on? Why are we electing, and why are so many ultra-left and ultra-right candidates getting elected to office? So when we see the party in the electorate, we have to understand that you have coalitions. Coalitions are groups of citizens who identify with the party, often thought of in demographics like Hispanics, African Americans, Jews versus Christians, that kind of thing. They tend to, an activist is someone who spends their own time, their effort, and their money to support political parties or individual candidates. But also remember that a lot of this is ideological in nature. So party coalitions. If you look at Democrats versus Republicans, there are demographic differences. 43% of people who are Democrat or lean towards the Democratic side. Whoops. excuse me. 43% tend to be male, 52% tend to be female. Whereas in the Republican side, 47% tend to be male and 42% tend to be female. So more females tend to be Democrats or lean Democrat than Republican. Age, if the younger you are, the more that you're going to lean towards the left. The older you are, the more you're going to lean towards the right. With race, 52% of Republicans tend to be white, whereas only 39% of Democrats tend to be white. African Americans, 86% of African Americans tend to lean towards the left. 8% of African Americans tend to lean towards the right. And I would argue that except in Florida, that tends to be, to a great extent, the way that the Hispanics tend to lead. Now, when you look at geographically, people in the Northeast tend to be more Democratic, and people in the South tend to be more Republican. When you look at education, people with less education tend to lean towards the Republican side, although it tends to be kind of shared. And people with more college education, college graduate education, tend to be on the Democratic side. That's not necessarily true, though, when it comes down to if you look at money. Now, what is true is that 60% of Republicans tend to be white evangelicals, and only 32% of Democrats tend to be white evangelicals, whereas in terms of the Catholic Church, 50% tend to be Republican, 40% tend to be Democrat. But if you look at Hispanic Catholics, that's a little different number. And white mainline Protestants, 49% tend to go Republican, 40% tend to go Democrat. Now, this is trends in party identification. And here's some things we know about party identification. First, it's the best predictor of vote choice. Second, party activists play a crucial role in helping the organization. Third, early victories of party identification are viewed as a deep attachment that one acquires early in life and generally maintains. Party ID, though, is more accurately thought of as a running tally, an ongoing evaluation that takes in new information. Are we ingrained to be Republicans and Democrats by our family, by our friends, by our jobs, by our education levels? Can we change? New information tends to reinforce previous views that account for the rough stability of party identity as identity in early studies. So in other words, we do tend to keep our party identification over our lifetime, becoming more moderate or becoming a little bit further to the right as we get older. So the impact of party identification in 2012, 8% of Democrats voted for Romney, whereas 92% voted for Obama. 32% of people voted as independents, and of those, 50% voted for Romney and 45% voted for Obama. And then if you look at Republicans, it's the opposite of the Democrats. 93% of Republicans voted for Romney, 7% voted for Obama. And since almost everyone elected in the House or the Senate is a Democrat or a Republican, actions that are taken inside a political party by a relatively small group of people, often with a heavy proportion of activists, will shape the choices that we make on election day. And that's why we have a two-party system. Should the parties choose their candidates, or should we have an open primary? And most would argue that the reason parties help choose their candidates, and we have open primaries, or we have primaries at all, is because we want to narrow down the ballot. So there are many kinds of primaries, and a primary is an election, and a caucus is kind of a meeting where we choose who's going to be the candidate. Now, your closed primary is a primary election system where only registered party members can vote in that party's primary. So you have to register as a Democrat or Republican ahead of time. or as an independent. Nonpartisan primaries are primary elections where the candidates from both parties are listed on the same primary ballot. All right, we call that a blanket primary. Following a nonpartisan primary, the two candidates who receive the most votes in the primary compete in the general election, even if they're from the same party. In an open or crossover primary, when you show up at the polls, you can pick whether you want to go with the Democrat or Republican Party. Texas has open primaries. Now, once you vote in that party, that's where you got to go back for your caucus. And a caucus election is a series of local meetings where registered voters select a particular candidate's supporters as delegates who will then vote for the candidates in a later state-level convention. The national elections, the state convention delegates select delegates to the national convention. Caucuses are used in some states to select delegates from the major parties' presidential nominating conventions. Some states use caucuses, and they have open caucuses to members of any party, while others have closed caucuses. So a caucus is more of a show of hands. It's a meeting. Now, as far as fundraising, where do the political parties get their fundraising? Well, the National Convention or National Committee is the major source. And then you have congressional campaign committees, senatorial campaign committees, and state and local level fundraising. So if you look, it's either at the state or local level or at the national level. Now, once somebody becomes a presidential candidate, the National Committee will generally do most of the fundraising, except that the candidates can be benefited by a 527, this super PAC, but they can't be directly benefited in terms of endorsing a candidate. Now, one of the most important ways that a party can help its candidate is to raise money to fund campaigns. In 2012, the Democratic National Convention, or National Committee, raised $1 billion to help re-elect Obama and to support other Democratic candidates. The Republican National Committee raised a similar amount. Parties can help democracy by putting qualified folks on the ballot. They can help them win elections. They give citizens clear choices to branding. And they get citizens activated to vote. Political parties are made up of people who are interested in winning first, and the goals mentioned above are second. The differences within and between parties and differences between regions make it impossible for all party candidates to work together on all aspects of the party platform in an election. I'll give you an example. In El Paso, it would be very difficult for a Democratic candidate to win an election if they're running on the pro-choice status of the Democratic Party, even though most candidates are Democrats in El Paso. Why? Because we have a lot of Hispanic Catholics, and the Catholic Church opposes pro-choice. So what is a party platform? A party platform is the list of pledges and promises about what the candidates from the party stand for and will fight for. This is what you stand on. That's a platform. The platform is made up of planks. However, the candidates are not required to support the party platform, and many ignore key provisions, like pro-gun Democrats, pro-life Republicans, although that would be rather interesting. It's a moderate Republican. A pro-life Democrat. Did I say pro-life Republicans? I meant pro-choice. Sorry about that. Who represents your values? This is the 2012 party platforms compared. On abortion, the Democrats believed in unrestricted access at the taxpayer expense, and the Republicans said all unborn children have a fundamental right to live. Under gay marriage, the Democrats' official platform is to support gay marriage. And under the Republicans, they support marriage as only between one man and one woman. On the support of Israel, the Democrats say they recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and on a revised vote, they wanted to do that. They didn't really want to support Israel directly. Whereas the Republicans say that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and they did it on the first vote, and they support Israel in all matters. That's because the Republicans see themselves as supporting a Judeo-Christian state. Now, under the Democrats, the use of God. There's a single mention of God that was added after initial removal from the 2012 platform. The Republican platform mentions God 12 times in the 2012 platform. He's in the Texas platform 200 times. So then we get to cooperation. Should the Republicans and Democrats be forced to cooperate with each other, or are we better off having an adversarial system? Parties are strongest when they are internally homogeneous. That means unified within their party. And externally heterogeneous, which means polarized from the other party. This is known as conditional party government, and that's what we have. Parties are always considering the questions, what proposals should we offer, and in what order should we offer them? The second question oftentimes is inconsequential, but many bills cannot make it through the legislative session simply because time of consideration and negotiation would run out. So, in what order makes a very big difference. The idea of what you offer as far as laws that you propose is called your political agenda. There are electoral considerations as well. A president who has just been elected and is in his honeymoon period can get a tremendous number of bills passed. By contrast, members of the minority party may be reluctant to let bills pass towards the end of a legislative session when they expect that they may win a majority, or at least that they could get more seats and be showing themselves as being obstinate. And this is what happens to us all the time. Accountability. Individuals are held to greater account in a normal election than the party is as a whole. Now, the party is held more to account in a national election. Individuals are held to greater account in a local or statewide election. Political parties help us figure out who's going to be rewarded and who's going to be punished. The dynamics of a unified and divided government are not as straightforward as they would appear. Approval ratings make a lot of difference. Presidents can have high approval ratings when facing a hostile Congress because they look as though they're fighting for what they believe in. Then we get to the idea of minor parties. Spoilers. Minor parties have been able to have an impact even though they rarely win. Like Ralph Nader and H. Ross Perot were both spoilers. A spoiler is someone who draws votes away from a major party and impacts the ability of the major party to get candidates elected. So the impact of minor parties tends to be limited. The question is why? The first reason is because there are steep hurdles to be achieved because you got to get on at the local level, the state level, 50 states. To have your candidate's name printed on the ballot, you have to go through a process. This requires lengthy and intensive signature gathering. It's described as having to run a marathon just before you run a 100-meter dash. The requirements to get on a ballot vary state by state. In Texas, it's well over 250,000 votes. There's something called Duverger's Law. This is the principle that in a democracy with a single-member districting, which we have, and plurality voting, which we have, like in the United States, only one of the two parties' candidates will have a realistic chance of winning a political office, and that's because independent voters fear the least favorite candidate will win. They believe that a minor party vote was a wasted vote, and they think they need to vote for the front runner. And that's what often happens is that the media will turn an election into a horse race, and that's what changes the behavior of your moderates.
Why are there more serious third-party candidates in the United States? Well, one very simple reason is the two parties have effectively created a monopoly or a duopoly. It is very, very difficult to get on the ballot in any state. There's a group called Americans Elect or America Elects that has been trying to create a third-party platform just to get on the ballot, and it takes hundreds of thousands of signatures. I think 1.5 million signatures in California to do it. It's a scandal, really, because democracy should be about giving people alternatives and allowing people's voices to be heard, but the two parties collude to make sure that you don't get a third party. The second piece of it, though, I would say, is America just does not have a very broad ideological spectrum. If you look at America's two parties, they're actually very close together in terms of their ideological differences. Both American parties would fit comfortably as kind of center-right parties in Europe. The Democrats and the Republicans. You have no real social democratic party. You have no real hyper-nationalist parties. If you look at the kind of width of the European political spectrum, the United States occupies a kind of narrow position on it. So it makes sense that we don't have 10 parties. Now, that may change, because one of the things that kept America ideologically narrow, if you will, was the fact that we had a kind of big middle-class society with big middle-class politics that everyone agreed on. And I think that as we become a more unequal society with greater disparities and greater diversities, you could very well imagine, different political movements at the very least starting up, so that the Ron Paul movement it represents a very different phenomenon than the Rick Santorum movement, and that would be very different from the people who would want to vote for Barack Obama. So I don't know if it translates into parties, it probably won't, but you'll have very, very distinct and incompatible political movements beginning to develop in the United States.
So let's look at the process of nominating candidates. Your closed primary is open only to voters who are registered with Party Vote. Your open primary is open to voters from any political party and independents, and your caucuses are party members that meet in groups to select delegates. From there, the delegates are selected at a convention, national convention. One is the Republican convention, and then the other is the Democratic convention. Now, the states can divide delegates or give all of them to the winning candidate. In the Democratic Party, the state's delegates are divided up proportionally. And then you get your national nominating convention, and that's where you get one Republican candidate and one Democrat candidate. And that is the end of our lecture for this chapter.